An innocent family slaughtered on a spring evening in 1922. Their corpses were found in their farmstead. However, mystery remains as to who was responsible for their horrific deaths. Tonight on Dark Curiosities, the Hinterkaifeck Murders. Andreas Gruber was a 63-year-old farmer who lived with his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's young children, and a maid named Maria Baumgartner in a farmstead 1 kilometre from the hamlet of Kaifeck in Bavaria, Germany. The name Hinterkaifeck translates as hidden behind the woods, describing just how remote the location was. It was late in the March of 1922 when Andreas Gruber noticed something odd. He informed a neighbour that he had seen strange footprints leading from the woodland nearby towards his farm. However, there were none leading back. Also, he had apparently heard unusual noises coming from the attic, which he assumed were footsteps, and had found an unusual newspaper, one of which the family never read. Prior to the murders, keys had also disappeared on several occasions, and Andreas noticed that the lock on his tool shed appeared to have been picked at. However, none of these oddities were reported to the police. According to reports, 6 months previously, the Gruber's former maid quit, believing the place to be haunted. The new maid, Maria, arrived on March 31st, 1922, which would, unfortunately, be her last day alive. The events of the night of March 31st, 1922 are uncertain. However, what is known is this. Andreas, Cecilia the elder, Victoria and her 7-year-old daughter Cecilia were somehow lured into the barn and killed. Victoria's 2-year-old son, Joseph, was murdered in his cot in his mother's bedroom, and Maria Baumgartner died in her bedchamber. Autopsies showed just how brutal and devastating the attacks were on the family. Andreas Gruber's right side of his face was described as being smashed, with his cheekbones protruding. Flesh seemingly shredded, and his face was caked with blood. His wife Cecilia had died from 7 blows to her head, one of which was triangular in shape. Her skull was cracked, and she also had bruising near her right eye, along with signs of asphyxiation. Their daughter, Victoria, also had a smashed skull, a small round injury at the upper skull. The right side of her face had been smashed by a blunt object, and she, too, had been strangled. She suffered 9 star-shaped blows to her head. Little Joseph died from a heavy blow to the face, and notes stated the top of his bassinet stroller had been utterly destroyed. Maria, the maid, who slept nearby in her chamber, had her face crusted with blood, one of her head wounds 4 centimetres deep, reportedly from a sharp hoe. Crosswise blows to the head were also noted on the autopsy. Perhaps, most heartbreakingly of all, was how young Cecilia Gabriel lost her life. She suffered severe head injuries, a circular wound on the right side of her face, smeared with blood, and her skull was smashed with several blows, a gaping transverse wound in her neck. She had suffered a broken lower jaw and cervical injury due to shock, and the little girl was found with clumps of her own hair curled up in her right hand. It is suggested that Cecilia Gabriel was the final person to die. It is worth noting that they were all beheaded post-mortem for further examination. However, their skulls were lost during the carnage of World War II. Therefore, the family were all buried decapitated. Following March 31st, neighbours became concerned when they had not seen any members of the family in a few days. A postman had seen that mail he had left before had not been touched, and young Cecilia had not appeared at school the following Monday. Between the 31st of March and April the 4th, although nobody had physically seen the family, it was noted that there was smoke rising from the chimney, and when investigators arrived at the scene, it appeared that food had been eaten in the kitchen. All livestock had been properly fed and cared for, despite the Grubers already being deceased. The motive was a high point of discussion. The crime scene had no evidence to suggest that anything was stolen, and the common consensus is that this was a personal crime. Some debate a crime of passion. It is even said that the late husband of widow Victoria had not died in the war as previously thought, and furthermore murdered the family for whatever reason. Victoria had also an apparently jealous and unpredictable ex-lover who apparently was young Joseph's father, and rumours also swirled about an incestuous relationship between Victoria and her father, Andreas, and even though this passed through the courts, it was acquitted. Victoria's lover, Lawrence Schlittenbauer, publicly claimed he was young Joseph's father, and the pair quickly fell into a bitter dispute. Schlittenbauer was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene and had apparently disturbed the bodies before police arrived. It wasn't until the following year, when the farm was torn down, when the murder weapon was discovered: a mattock. This particular mattock was recognised by a local farmhand as being one which was crafted by Andreas Gruber and was kept within his tool shed. It was speculated, however, that more than one weapon was used in the attacks. Only a shrine remains at where Hinterkaifeck once stood following its demolition in 1923. Any suspects that police had passed away, and a lot of the original evidence had been lost. To this day, the murders at Hinterkaifeck both fascinates and terrifies, the horrors of that night being the nightmares of many. It seems that this case will never be solved, and, most devastatingly of all, the Gruber family will never have their killer brought to justice.